I'll admit it, I spend way too much time scrolling through YouTube. And recently, one of my favorite channels has been bombarding me with extremely subtle ads at the start of their videos.
Download the game, download the game, download the game, download the game.
Some of you might have missed it, but this type of advertising is called superliminal advertising.
Superliminal?
I'll show you. Hey, you! Join the Navy! Yeah, alright. I'm in.
My name's Joel, and I make video games for a living. On today's episode, I've been worn down by the grumps and downloaded Homebody. Today's topic is about designing mechanics for a genre, and we'll go over making puzzle games with tension, signposting and setting a scene, and how I would have changed the first day if I were on the dev team. And seeing as the superliminal advertising worked out so well for the Game Grumps, I think I'll give it a try too. Like, comment, and subscribe! Do it! Do it now!
Do it! Just do it!
For the uninitiated, since this isn't a AAA release, Homebody is marketed as a horror puzzle game where you play as Emily, a socially awkward girl visiting friends she's drifted apart from over the years. Her struggle of reuniting with them is cut short when a masked murderer shows up and does their thing, beginning a time loop where Emily needs to solve the mystery of the house to break the loop and escape. If you're the type of player to avoid horror games, which I know exists, then rejoice, my friend, because despite what Homebody says, it's not a horror game. No, this is something entirely different. It might be a subtle difference, but it matters a lot in our context. Horror has a goal of scaring you, either through gross imagery or revulsion like the Saw movies, or through being actually good horror movies where there's a clear threat that the protagonist needs to overcome or run away from, like the Alien movies. A thriller, by comparison, is about building tension, and while it can be scary, that's not the main goal. A perfect example is the TV show Stranger Things. There are supernatural threats, some people die, but the vast majority of the show is about finding out what's happening. How did Hawkins, Indiana get so messed up? Where has Will gone? And what's Eleven's backstory? The veil of mystery keeps you engaged, and while we may occasionally scare the audience, that's not the core of a thriller. Here, we just want you on the edge of your seat.
Look how tense she is.
She's fine. Oh.
In this regard, Homebody knocks it out of the park. Every time the loop is reset, you're discovering more of the story, pulling back the veil. The game even uses your deaths as a way to hint at certain puzzles, telling you about the NPCs and their past jobs with Steam vents, clearly pushing players to talk to that NPC if they want a hint. The game felt more like an escape room than a horror experience. The puzzles share so many designs with escape game tropes that it made them easily recognizable for me, and it definitely made me feel smart for solving a lot of what the game threw my way. Now, because I don't want to spoil any of the puzzles or the story, I won't go into any additional depth, but suffice to say that most of the puzzles in the game are great, and the mass murderer roaming the halls adds pressure, forcing you to plan your route, only examine things when you're safe, and it creates tension when you're inputting solutions. The framing of the game supports the core design, so don't look at it as a horror game. Look at it as a puzzle game where you die to get a hint and reset the board. After all, if you're like me, you'll probably find yourself chasing the killer a few times trying to get murdered.
Oh shit, suicide by cop! I love these!
And when you're not trying to die, the murderer provides that wonderful spice of tension that our thriller needs. Weaving a narrative into a puzzle game with a time loop mechanic can be a difficult task, so it's pretty understandable that Homebody falters on this aspect. In my first playthrough, and in the ones I watched of other people, we were lost on the first day. I didn't know there was a time loop mechanic, so as I explored the house, I actually wasted a lot of time messing with a bunch of pointless stuff, like trying to make tea. And the game wasn't willing to wait on my nonsense.
America!
I get it, Dad.
America! Australia!
Oh, that's enough.
America! Australia!
Ow! Here in America, we don't tolerate that kind of crap, sir!
Before I knew it, scripted events were happening. A storm caused the house to lose power, and then my friends were getting murdered. None of them ran away, they just stood there and let it happen as if murder was nothing to worry about while I was freaking out.
What's happening? Oh, man! Oh, man, I shot Marvin in the face.
But all it takes is a brisk walk to avoid the killer, so I ran circles around him, uncertain of what to do. Without the backstory or having found a starting puzzle, I resolved to looking through newspapers and pamphlets for clues, trying any dates listed to open the locks I had found. Part of the problem comes from suboptimal signposting. In games, signposting refers to the ways designers subtly guide players. For example, lights usually draw players towards them. Color can inform players. Red lighting usually signals danger, or when it's a barrel it means explosive, even though in reality red exploding barrels aren't nearly as common as games would have us believe. Most of Homebody's important elements are obvious enough. I'm sure you can spot puzzles in the background of the video. What I will do though is point out a few problem areas to show you how improper signposting can cause confusion in players. As a designer, you never want your players to have to Google a solution, and some of Homebody's puzzles could have used a better connection. In general, I did fairly well on most of the puzzles, but I definitely wasn't going to set a high score. Let's start with the generic interactable icon. While holding the shoulder button down, the game will highlight anything that can be interacted with. These highlights all use the same white circle, so it doesn't help you tell a puzzle from a red herring. Next, in this scene, see how much focus these newspapers are given. They occupy so much of the frame. You'd think they're important. This kettle is a beautiful bright red and easily noticeable. In one of the cutscenes, the characters even talk about a burner starting a fire. Then there's a dark tunnel. Emily points out as not being able to see to the end of it. I was expecting to find a flashlight and collect an item from it at some point. None of those are ever used for puzzles, so some inclusions seem a little peculiar to me. Especially the tunnel. The kettle has me confused as to why it wasn't used for a puzzle, especially given the flashback. The newspaper and other items that clearly aren't puzzle related should have had a different interactable symbol to designate them as story items. The lack of direction and distractions caused me to miss some of the key story elements. In one post-death scene, a character mentioned that I had seen them with their throat slit, and my initial reaction was,
"Why the fuck you lying? Why you always lying?"
The way the game works also teaches players not to talk to the NPCs. The post-death scenes explain that they give out hint, and as a player, I wanted to avoid hints. But also, on the second day, when you talk to them, your dialogue options start to fail. You'll gain options like, "Everybody panic! Oh my god, there's a bear loose in the gully!" But Emily will say things completely unrelated, which is great for a thriller since it's another mystery. Why can't I speak about the events happening? And we as players get to be the voice in Emily's head screaming. It's amazing, but because talking to the NPCs seemed pointless to me, I was really confused when scripted story events were happening later in the game. It's important to get players started on the right foot. I think Bruce Shelley said it best. The player should have fun, not the designer, programmer, or computer. Basically, for a puzzle designer, that means you should be happy to see people succeed, not revel in a sense of superiority when they fail to outsmart your puzzle. Now again, there's nothing wrong with the puzzles in Homebody. They're actually really good. But if I were on the team, I'd make sure to hit players with a much more obvious starting point so they aren't sidetracked by the red herrings I bumped into on my first playthrough. The first day's events should be entirely scripted, not run by the clock. We're coming into a new friend group, and understanding their relationship is vital to the story. The removal of time pressure also allows players to get acquainted with the house's layout. It's pretty easy to prevent players from solving the puzzles as well, because our main character, Emily, has a lot of anxiety. A simple text pop-up saying, "Maybe I shouldn't touch this right now," would fit the game perfectly. The way I'd do it is keep the opening in the car. Then I'd wait for players to speak to every NPC at least once before I triggered the lightning strike. The gang would all gather in the kitchen and then split up to explore the house looking for candles and the like. Emily would then explore the house a second time and have to find all of her friends. I'd put one by the clock and have them mention that the lightning strike took place at 9 PM. Another one would be near the upstairs computer and point out that it's on a backup generator and must therefore be important. Lastly, I'd put another one near the basement stairs, and they'd mention that when the power went out, the door opened. They'd be blocking the path so that players can't explore the basement yet. Then when the player has bumped into all of them, I'd bring the characters back into the kitchen where they'd all promptly get murdered. What I like about this is that it gets players into the habit of talking to the NPCs. It gives them a few starting puzzles and locations to explore, ensures they're at least somewhat familiar with the locations, and it reinforces the time loop mechanic by pointing out when scripted events happen and forcing their first death. We're setting the player's expectations better this way, and getting them adjusted to the fact that they're going to die while playing this game, and that sometimes it's even beneficial so they can reset the time or get a hint.
So I'm just supposed to keep dying until I figure out who my killer is? That's your genius plan.
Do you have a better idea?
The fact that the NPC behavior would also shift after that further accentuates how weird the events happening are. Similar to how Emily can't speak about the murders with her friends, they'd all stop reacting to the power outage or the murderer. If it weren't for the Game Grumps, I probably wouldn't have given Homebody a second look. It's an indie game, and there are plenty of improvements that could have been made, like giving me a next or previous button while I'm reading the books. And a lot of my deaths felt cheap. I'd constantly die to the static camera angles, which caused Emily's brain to malfunction as I turned a corner. But you get what you pay for, and that's part of the charm of an indie game. You're not paying full AAA price for this experience, and when I compare it to an escape room, it's roughly the same price. So I could play an escape game for 1 hour, or I could play Homebody, which has a runtime closer to 7 hours, has a much more comprehensive story, and can absolutely be played with friends all working together to solve puzzles.
Well, I guess there's nothing to do but spend the entire night methodically solving this puzzle.
And looking at it through that light, Homebody is worth the price of admission, flaws and all. Even if you don't resonate with the story, it can be a fun distraction for a weekend. And there's plenty of classic, immature Game Grumps style comedy to be found here, like a conversation about hot nut water or Emily's luggage combination being 420.
That's the stupidest combination I ever heard in my life! That's the kind of thing an idiot would have on his luggage!